Her husband disappeared 6 weeks after they got married. 70 years later, she learns the tragic truth. Peggy and Billie's story is more than just a mystery. It's so much more than that. Even without knowing what the future may hold, love will always win. Let's share this amazing story of a married couple. But before we start, don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe to our channel to get some interesting stuff. Let's start at the very beginning. Vernon, Texas in the 1920s. This was the place and era that Peggy Seal grew up in. She was a beautiful 18-year-old and worked at the Altus, Oklahoma Air Force Base as an electric instrument mechanic. It wouldn't be long before she met Billie Harris. His father is an assistant supervisor at the base, and as soon as he met Peggy, he knew she was the one for his son. It wouldn't take long before Billie's father informed him about the wonderful young lady, and he decided to do something about it. "I began to get letters from Billie," Peggy said. "I was a little fearful of this man who had not seen me, but he thought I was okay. So when he came on leave from the Army, all of a sudden the door of the airplane opened and there was Billie Harris saying, 'Hello, Peggy,' and that was about it." The pair shared one of those mysterious silences that you'd expect from a romantic drama, when each person lays their eyes on the other and the rest is history. After Peggy and Billie exchanged many letters, the happy pair decided to take the next step in their relationship. And after meeting Peggy a number of times, Billie took the ultimate leap of faith when he proposed to her. Peggy didn't have to think about it. She knew he was the one and gave a resounding yes. On September 22, 1943, the couple tied the knot in Florida. But sadly, the newlyweds could not anticipate what was about to happen. It was a devastating blow to the new husband and wife. Their honeymoon was truly over. On one hand, the couple had made their vows to one another, but on the other hand, they both swore an oath to the U.S. They promised to protect their land. Unfortunately, the latter trumped the former, and Peggy and Billie were forced to part ways. Their dreams were instantly shattered, no longer able to spend time together or build a family together. World War II had begun, and Billie was just one of many Americans to be drafted. The best were taken from their homes and utilized because of their exceptional skill sets. But Billie wasn't shocked when his draft letter arrived. He was sure that his time would come. In an interview on a website that commemorated the 354th Fighter Group, Peggy tried to recall how she dealt with the terrible news, finding out that her husband was walking away from her. His group was all taken to Tallahassee, and the wives were taken there to a huge hotel, Peggy said. This was followed by more instructions for Billie's wife. When the men were called up, the wives were told to go home and not tell anyone that their husbands had been sent overseas until they'd arrived there safely. After just 6 weeks of marriage, they'd have to part ways, and there was nothing Peggy or Billie could do about it. Only once they arrived at their destination safely were the wives allowed to disclose any information about their husbands. Unfortunately, his arrival in mainland Europe would be the last indication that Peggy knew whether Billie was alive or not. A bureaucratic faux pas on the U.S. Army's part meant that many worried wives would not hear back from the military about their husband's whereabouts or well-beings for long periods of time. Billie had completely fallen off Peggy's radar. The Army sent lies to many wives back in the United States, and Peggy was one of them. Although the Supreme Headquarters in Allied France informed her that Billie was safe and that there was nothing to worry about, that simply wasn't true. After this serious breach of trust from the military, Peggy realized that she needed to seek the truth out for herself. Whether it was his voice or a dated photograph, she needed proof that her husband was at the very least okay. Whatever information the military sent Peggy, she was ready to act upon it. She wanted to get to the bottom of the problem. "I was told not to be concerned, that no doubt he was being processed. Billie's parents and I chose to believe that he was back in the United States. We were hoping that he was in a hospital somewhere and maybe just didn't know who he was or had lost his memory. We'd heard of cases like that." Unfortunately, Peggy and Billie's parents couldn't change the truth. Her husband and their son was gone. By March 1945, Billie's wife knew that he was probably dead. It was a catch-22 situation. Did she want to find out Billie's fate, despite the possibility that he may have perished? Or sit back and hope that one day he would return? Peggy made her decision and chose to take action, contacting the International Red Cross. She desperately wanted answers. Initially, the first time she contacted the Red Cross, Peggy was not rewarded with positive results. In fact, they were originally far from helpful. She recalled how the people she called gave an awfully lazy answer, and for a moment she lost considerable hope in philanthropic organizations. According to her, after asking whether they could help her on the search for Billie, they simply said, "We cannot afford to look into this because he will come home before we can get an answer." Exhausting all her options, Peggy tried very hard to get in touch with people in high places, people who could affect change in the shortest amount of time. So she turned to the Texas congressman at the time, Ed Gossett, who served in Congress for 12 years, 1939 to 1951. "After quite some time, I sent that release to Ed Gossett, who was our congressman in Washington, D.C., she said. I asked him to look into it and see what happened. There was still no definitive answer. Peggy received information that was completely contradictory in nature. Well, one report read that Billie was missing, the other specified that he was found and was already dead. As the years passed by, Peggy never gave up her search. Many poor leads came her way, and she kept bumping into dead ends. It wasn't over for Billie's wife until she saw his body, dead or alive. But it wouldn't be long until her search was over. Fast forward to 2005, and Billie's location and fate were still a mystery. Congressman Representative Thornberry even mentioned Billie in a speech and carelessly declared that he was MIA, or missing in action. His speech was ill-informed as his team of researchers failed to give him accurate information on Billie's situation. Eventually, Thornberry apologized to Peggy for jumping to conclusions in regards to her husband and being so insensitive about an issue that had been going on for 60 years. But Peggy didn't begrudge Mac for what had transpired. On the contrary, she knew that he was also a victim of journalists who were simply using her and Billie's story to attack him. They said, "It's our duty as journalists to expose politicians." She said, "There's nothing more I could do," and they were putting this out all over the United States, virtually all over the world. They used at me to get to Mac Thornberry, and they got at him illegally. It wasn't right. But amazingly, the truth was staring her in the face in the form of Billie's cousin, Alton Harvey. Many of Billie's family, like Peggy, searched long and hard for many years to bring him back home, but to no avail. But then Harvey came along. After looking through the Department of the Army's database, Harvey discovered something integral to the entire investigation. With this vital information, he had the potential to locate where his relative had been all that time. And Harvey wasn't the only person to use that database to search for Billie. A foreign French woman had been on record after doing research on the former lieutenant. But what did this mean? Was this an important person in Billie's life? It turns out that the French woman actually inquired about the information only half a year before Harvey began his investigation. This perplexed him. He asked himself, why would somebody from France want to learn about a man who has not seen his wife in nearly 70 years? This only fueled Harvey's interest, and after many years of an unsolved mystery, it seemed like some big revelations were finally coming his way, and most importantly, to Peggy. The information actually revealed that Billie was posted in the United Kingdom. His job was to fly daily across the English Channel in a P-51 Mustang. Ultimately, Billie was awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross Award as a result of his fantastic work ethic, teamwork skills, and exceptional piloting abilities. He also received 2 air medals in light of his heroic efforts during his service. Amongst these wonderful accolades was some more good news coming Harvey and Peggy's way. In July 1944, Billie was granted permission to return home after completing about 100 missions. Elated by the news, he wrote to his beloved wife telling her how much he missed her and informed her that he was finally on his way back to the United States after all this time. Unfortunately, fate turned its ugly head, and on the day of his planned sail back to the United States, the Army told Billie that he would need to wait a little longer. Billie was completely dejected by the news. He got so excited, knowing that he was so close to reuniting with his dear wife. But because the ship was full of wounded troops, Billie narrowly missed out on the opportunity to return home. The next ship that he could get on wouldn't depart for weeks. After being through so much, Billie and Peggy now had this obstacle to contend with, and ultimately it would change their lives forever. In order to pass the time while he waited for the next ship back home to his wife, Billie continued to serve the Army. He would carry out many more missions during the week ahead. This would include his final mission, which would put his life on the line. As he flew over the northern French town of Levens, soldiers shot him down. Spiraling out of control, Billie only had a few minutes to make the most unthinkable of decisions. Despite being hit, Billie used his many years of experience to his advantage. His quick-fire mind provided him with 2 choices. Either he could eject himself from his plane seat, saving his life in the process, or he could remain in the crashing plane and turn it away from the innocent French civilians. which would cost him his life. It was the toughest decision he would ever have to make. So what did he do? Billy selflessly crashed his plane into a forest. This way he wouldn't harm any civilians in the nearby towns. One of those innocent civilians who Billy saved was a French lady who explored his records just half a year before Harvey did. The terrible crash took Billy's life away from him. The people of Levents who saw this pilot divert himself away from them knew that he had saved them. So the town has honored Billy's life ever since. Because the town didn't have much information about him, they just assumed Billy was a French-Canadian who was saving his fellow Francophones. Despite burying him nearby and honoring him, they didn't really know him. When his wife found out about where his body was buried, Peggy jumped on the opportunity and flew to France to visit her long-lost love so that she could be close to him. Billy's remains were buried in a grave at the Normandy American Cemetery Memorial. He's still spoken of fondly all over Normandy, and according to the people of Levents, his grave to this day is the most decorated grave in all of Normandy. As far as Billy's wife is concerned, Peggy is a regular and devoted attendee of his grave. When people speak of closure, there are people who have never experienced anything like this, she said in an interview. The story goes to show that miles and time can't break the love of some married couples. Peggy was always a devoted wife to Billy and would love him forever. She never gave up on him, even after discovering the truth. That's all for today's story. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share this with your friends and loved ones.